The Sciforror Film Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Sciforror Film Podcast. I am Andy Walker again. I changed a little bit at some point, but I came back to it. So,
you were Andy Walker at one point before?
Yeah.
Oh, what?
For a day or two I wasn't, and now I am again. For a day or two I was an occasional table.
I will say before we start, have you got your teeth in this time? And
I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what the we'll have to wait and see what the show throws up.
Just prove that point then, ain't you?
Yeah. Exactly. Right. What am I doing? Oh yes. I'm Andy Walker, and I'm again here as always with my son Scott. Hello, Scott.
Hello there.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you very much. I have realised though that I am wearing the exact same shirt as I was last week.
Well, these things happen.
I've only just realised. I sat there with like,
I'm wearing exactly the same head I was wearing last week.
well, that makes a lot of sense.
Boy. Right. So this week we are we are reviewing two short films and a long one again. We have something sort of specialist this week, something different things. Yes. So to start off with, the first of the short films is a science fiction film from 2020, which is called Moonfall, not to be confused with the current disaster movie. And I mean that in as much as it's not about a disaster, it just is a disaster
movie.
It is possibly the most ridiculous film I think I've ever seen. It's worth watching, but it is possibly the most ridiculous film I've ever seen. Anyway, back to this one, Moonfall from 2020, written and directed by Zachary Thibodeau. I think that's pronounced it, Thibodeau, and Odessa Ferrara. Yeah. Anyway, screenplay was by Dylan Creef. The cast is Odessa Ferrara, Paul Lott, Fernando Ferraro, Zachary Thibodeau, and Jeanette Sanfranco. The music was by Jonah Orion and Thomas Quirion. There you go. The synopsis says humanity is all but extinct and Moonfall is its last hope. Alice is plagued by her past while struggling to prove herself worthy for the program. But not everything as it seems in this decaying world. So, what do you think?
I wasn't actually a big fan of this. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what it. I think again, this is the same as it was last week. It's the same idea again of the whole natural, not like this whole sort of world coming to an end and we need to save it. Or I don't know. It's
again,
it just felt it dragged so much for me.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I mean, I like the way it began with the film clips intercut with like the pictures of the planet falling apart and all that kind of thing. Yes, it's got that eco message, the same as the one we had last week. It's a well-made film and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it's just too long. It's a bit too long.
I will say there are parts of it that made me feel like I'd taken something.
Yeah, I mean, some of the lighting and the
Yeah,
color effects were quite good. But one of the things I have a problem with it is this is supposed to be a dying and decaying planet.
yeah, it was very green.
It was. It was the trees and the grass were very lush and green for a
Yeah,
dying
I
planet.
don't think it helped as well with the filter they put on, which is
No,
obvious they did on the camera work because the sky's not purple. But
isn't it?
it's just, well, it's not in everyone else's world. Might be in yours,
Okay.
but it's just it made everything look obviously meant to be like a bit of an odd colour, but
Yeah,
it didn't help that obviously it then done the same thing to the suit she was wearing, which looked like a day glow suit. But
yeah.
I don't know, it just
I think the
yeah,
whole problem with it is that the middle section of this was just far too long.
yeah, it dragged way too much.
I mean, it's okay-ish, but it's just a bit overlong, and it's a problem I think with a lot of films that have these kind of eco messages. They just try too hard to push the message,
Yeah,
and you can do that, but you don't need to make it such a, a big film. You know, I mean, you could make a 5, 6 minute film and get the same message across as well you can by making a 15-minute film.
yeah, I think that's the problem with it. It's the fact it's too long and you almost lose the message within it.
Yeah,
Or what's going on? It's sort of it got to the point where I read the synopsis and I was like, okay, it's another message. And it got to about halfway through and I was like, what are they trying to say at the moment?
yeah.
It confused me a lot with the whole trippiness and sort of
See, I
bit
think
of that. It
the
just
other problem is that you had the message of it being this sort of eco thing and all that, but there was also the message about the sort of class system
yeah,
and how and why people are chosen for what goes on and all. It's all a bit. I think it all just got a bit muddled in the middle.
yeah.
Okay, so on to our next short film. Now, this is a this is a special thing. We were asked if we would review this.
Yes.
Um, This is a film from 2021 called Mr. Sleep. Hailstorm Pictures, in conjunction with the University of West Scotland. Writer and director is John Perivolaris, who some of you may know we have interviewed before and I worked with a couple of years ago. The cast is Anthony Kelly and Shawnee Henderson, and the director of photography and like cinematography and all that is Mark Boggis, who also worked on the film that I worked with John on as well. So the synopsis says an introverted woman welcomes her charming new flatmate, but shortly after finds one of her eyes has developed a rash and someone's been in her room. Is she losing her mind or is something sinister at play? Now, John has classed this as a thriller, and I suppose it is, but it's also got many of the same type of
Mm,
atmospheric and suspense features that you get in a horror film.
yeah.
So I don't know, is it a thriller? Is it a horror? It doesn't have the same kind of payoff that you would get at a horror as a horror film, in which somebody ends up dying or whatever, and there's blood and guts everywhere.
No.
But that's the only thing that's different.
But again, we have watched films, a lot of horror films where they've proven you don't have to have the blood and guts and
Yeah,
all that in it. This, I think, it does feed into that horror aspect because it's sort of that whole fear factor of you're letting someone into your life into your sort of safe space that you're hoping that you can trust, and then find out what they were doing, and
yeah,
it's sort of that the way she reacts is very understandable. But
yeah,
it's
yeah,
sort of that moment of what he could then do afterwards, whether or not he could go the nice way or could potentially go like a horrific way.
yeah.
So I think it can have them aspects on it because pretty sure there's people that have had that happen to them. It's probably quite a horrifying time.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean that's the thing. It does have all of the aspects of a horror film, apart from the kind of like you would expect that the end of it, either she would kill him or he would kill her.
Yeah,
So, you know, that was kind of, but because that's not there, it kind of, I don't think it detracts anything from the film, because I think the
No,
film's brilliant. But it makes it difficult to see whether or not you would actually class it as a horror, or whether it's I don't know, horrific thriller. I don't know. I don't know how you would class
it's
it as a
definitely got
horror.
it's definitely got the thriller aspect to it, I suppose. But like you said, it's got the traits of pretty much everything you would have in a horror film,
Yeah,
other than the typical death of it. Really, I
yeah.
suppose
The
the
blood and
fact
guts bit
that
at the end.
yeah, the bit that everyone ties to a horror film, which is the blood and guts and the death and everything like that.
Yeah,
So I suppose it's sort of one of them ones like we've had before that sits quite precariously on that border of which one is it, and
yeah,
whether or not it can
yeah.
be classed as both or what.
But I mean, it's very well made. I mean, to be honest, Mark's cinematography is great. I think he
Yeah,
did such a good he's done such a good job on both the films I've seen him done with John. Um, the lighting and sound work really well. They're exactly right for what is needed. And the acting's really good as well.
yeah. The saying the lighting effect that they've done, especially when they do the shots of later in the evening when they're in the room, and all when especially when he brings his hand forward, and all you can see is his sort of part of his hand and the fingertips. To have just that lit up
Yeah,
and
yeah.
not show him and have him in complete darkness, but see his silhouette. Oh, very very well done.
Oh yeah, it was incredibly well done. It's a really got a really good look to it, and
It,
I really like it. I really like the film. I think it's a great film. Um,
yeah,
and I don't care whether it's a thriller or a horror. To be honest, I just think it's a really good film.
yeah. It's like I said, it's one of the ones that can quite happily sit on the sort of border of being whether or not it's a thriller or a horror, or whether or not you can class it as both. I think it
Yeah,
doesn't really matter. This film is such an amazing film, and I again after like we've spoken to John before, and obviously you've worked with John and a few of the other people that are involved in this. I am sort of worried, and might just have to ask John if he's okay if he's come up with this idea, just because we've spoken about this before, where people have had these ideas, and it's just if this is just one that's randomly popped into his head, then or
there
whether or
are
not he knows someone this has happened to. Either way, that's still quite a terrifying thing.
there are a couple of bits, a couple of effects in it, physical effects of like some of the things that he does to her, especially why she gets developed a rash in her eye. I just kind of think, how did they do that? Because it's incredibly well done.
Yeah, I've got to admit, when they show the clip of what was going on, even like, I will admit, I've got quite a strong stomach. When it
Yeah,
comes to a lot of things, I can tolerate quite a lot of things. But even I sat there at that point and went, ugh.
yeah,
Like, I don't mind. I can sort of move my own eye around and stuff like that, but I don't mind that sort of aspect. I've seen horror films where worst happens, but I looked at that and I was like, that's turned my stomach.
yeah. It's a bit. Well, yeah. I mean, again, I think it's a great film, and we're going to be talking to John next week. Either one of us, both of us, or some combination of the two of us somehow. I don't know what I'm talking about there, but yes, we have John on next week, and we're going to ask him about this and what else he's working on currently. Um, he's very good and very talented. Particularly,
Is this? I will ask. I will have to say this. We're not trying to be biased, or I'm not. I'm definitely not really biased.
no,
And I'm pretty sure my dad's not trying to be biased. Obviously,
no,
having a
no,
bit
not
of an
at all.
opinion of working with him before. But I will say this has got on the YouTube where we watched it. It does say the fact that he won awards with it, and
Absolutely, yeah.
all credit to John. I can completely see why his films are winning awards.
Oh, yeah,
It's
definitely.
it's such an amazing teams that he puts together over time.
He does. He works with some really good people, and he's got a great way about him as well. And I can't wait to see more of what he does. Yeah, I want to see him do feature films.
Yeah.
Um, we'll see. Okay, so we're going on to our feature length film, which is something a bit different here. It's a 1978 film called the horror film called The Legacy. It's done by Universal Films, and it was a British film, but with some American stars, and it's a bit, different. Anyway, let's go through it. So it came out in 1978. Director was Richard Marquand, who did some TV stuff in the 60s and the 70s. And apart from this, he also did Star Wars Return of the Jedi. He did some work on that in 1983. Writers, we have Jimmy Sangster, who wrote the original story and the screenplay, along with two other people. He did some TV stuff in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, other things he wrote, either the story or the screenplay for, we have X the Unknown in 1956, Curse of Frankenstein 1957, Dracula 1958, Revenge of Frankenstein 1958, The Snorkel 1958, Blood of the Vampire 1958, The Trollenberg Terror in 1958, Jack the Ripper 1959, The Man Who Could Cheat Death 1959, The Mummy 1959, The Brides of Dracula 1960, Taste of Fear 1961, Paranoiac in 1963, The Maniac in 1963, Nightmare 1964, Dracula Prince of Darkness 1966, Crescendo 1970, Horror of Frankenstein 1970, Whoever Slew Auntie Roo in 1972, Fear in the Night 1972, Phobia in 1980, and Flashback in the year 2000. He had a bit of a break.
Yeah, just a bit.
So that's quite a decent sort of thing. The other people who wrote the screenplay, we've got Patrick Tilley, who did some TV stuff in the 60s and wrote the screenplay for The People That Time Forgot in 1977. And Paul Wheeler, what's that, Raoul Wheeler? Anyway, who did basically just did TV stuff in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So they were responsible for the screenplay and the story. Now, the cast. First off, we have Catherine Ross, who did TV stuff in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and was in she's only 4 films that come under our sort of like umbrella. But what 4 films they are: The Stepford Wives in 1975, The Swarm in 1978, The Final Countdown in 1980, and Donnie Darko in 2001.
Yeah, there's as much as she's done other films for horror and sci-fi, that is definitely four quite distinctively good films.
Yeah. And next we have Sam Elliott, who I'm sure everybody knows. Did some TV work in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 2000s, 2010s. For us, as far as our stuff goes, we have got Frogs in 1972, The Hulk, oh no, sorry, not The Hulk, just Hulk in 2003, Ghost Rider 2007, Golden Compass in 2007, and The Man Who Killed Hitler and then Bigfoot, then The Bigfoot in 2018.
Well, I would say I've seen a lot of Sam Elliott films, and that's still got to be one of my favourites.
It's just bizarre. So then we have John Standing, did TV stuff in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. He was in The Psychopath or Psychopath even in 1966, Torture Garden in 1967, Night Flyers in 1987, The Calling in 2000, Animal in 2005, and V for Vendetta in 2005.
Yeah.
Then we have Ian Hogg. Now, Ian Hogg hasn't done any films that are interesting to us. He did do some sort of horror-related stuff on TV in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we have Margaret Tyzak, did TV stuff in the 60s, 70s, 90s, and 2000s. She was also in, this is another incredible thing, she was also in 2001: A Space Odyssey in 1968, A Clockwork Orange in 1971, The Quatermass Conclusion in 1979, and Until Death in 2002.
Yeah, it's again, it does seem to be the fact that if they're going to do horror films, they do them right.
Yeah.
The ones they go on to do.
Then we have Charles Gray, who I'm sure people will again know, did TV stuff in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. He was in The Devil Rides Out in 1968. He was in Theatre of Blood in 1973 and Tales that Witness Madness in 1973. But in both of those, he just provided the voice for a character and was completely uncredited, which is a bit weird. He did The Beast Must Die in 1974, The Rocky Horror Picture Show in 1975, Three Dangerous Ladies in 1977, Shock Treatment in 1981, and Firestar First Contact in 1991. Here we have Lee Montague, who again didn't do any films, but did do TV stuff in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Hildegard Neal, who did TV stuff in the 60s and 70s. And then Marianne Broom, who did nothing. Nothing else of any interest to us whatsoever. Then we have William Abney, who did some TV stuff in the 60s and 70s. Did Horrors of the Black Museum in 1959. Never Take Candy from a Stranger in 1960 and City of the Dead in 1960. We have Patsy Smart, who did TV stuff in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and was in The Telltale Heart in 1960 and Trauma in 1976. Matthias Kilroy, who just did some TV stuff in the 70s. Reg Harding, who did the Plague of the Zombies in 1966 and Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope in 1977, but was uncredited in both of them. Poor sod. Then we have Roger Daltrey.
Yeah.
He's best known for being lead singer of The Who, obviously. Did some TV stuff in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s. He was in a film called Vampirella in 1996, which was a straight-to-video film. And then he was in a film called .com for Murder in 2007, which I think is a computerized update of Dial M for Murder. But I don't know. Anyway, the synopsis for this says, an American couple in England stumble upon a rambling mansion where a number of powerful individuals have been summoned by its patriarch regarding the home's legacy. Now, I've got to say that, unfortunately, the original version that I had of this that I watched, which was just straight through film, which was on YouTube, has now been removed from YouTube, as has the entire channel it was on. So the only other version I could find of it on YouTube has somebody doing a pseudo Elvira introduction to it and bits throughout it with lots of very annoying adverts that just cut in and cut out without any kind of anything to tell you it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Which is rather annoying, but hey ho. So what did you think?
I will say it's not the typical Sam Elliott film I'm used to.
It's not a typical 1970s, late 70s British horror film, to be honest.
To be honest, yeah, it's not a typical film that I'm used to.
No.
It's a very, very weird film, really. There's some very good aspects here. I like some of the angles and camera shots they had, things, but I don't know. I will say it, whether or not it was written this way and they chose him for it, or whether or not they sort of decided afterwards after they chose him. But it's nice to see that no matter what film Sam Elliott's in, he has to ride a horse.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Has to do the whole cowboy thing on
it may be in his contract. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's a very young. I've got to admit, I had to work this out. Sam Elliott was 34 in this film.
Yeah,
that moustache just was there the whole time.
Oh no,
it's just amazing.
I must admit the only picture I've ever seen of Sam Elliott from a film where he hasn't got a moustache was in 1970, I think it was. He did a American TV film about Evel Knievel.
Yeah,
and he didn't have a moustache in that.
No, I don't know. It is a good film, I suppose. It's got in places. I don't know. It's just, there's some weird and wonderful twists and turns in it, and it's very bizarre. But I don't know. just a very weird film.
Okay.
I do agree with you. Actually, it's not a typical 70s film.
No, it's not a typical 70s British horror movie at all. In
No.
fact, in many ways, it reminds me of Italian horror movies.
Mm.
It's that I don't know. There's something about it that reminds me of like Italian horror movies. It's very atmospheric. Not a lot happens in some parts of it, even though you've got all the atmosphere going on, and you're just
Yeah.
expecting something to happen, but not a lot does. It's very interesting. But basically, it's a creepy house full of creepier people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a creepy house for the creepy people that you find out later on that are actually it's weird because they agreed to the comments about the fact that they're in a sort of witchcraft cult sort of thing,
Yeah,
but they're not. It's all to do with the owner of the house and his powers that he's got.
yeah. I mean, it doesn't start like a typical horror movie because,
No.
to be honest with you, the opening part of it, up until the point where they get knocked off their motorbike, it could have been a rom-com or a romantic movie. The music and the
Yeah.
shots they were showing, it was very odd. I
Yeah.
thought, am I watching the right film? And to be honest, what I find quite interesting is that Catherine Ross doesn't, but Sam Elliott seems so out of place amongst those people.
Yeah. Even with the other American who's the music producer in it, like the sort of typical American music sort of guy for the 70s. It sort of
Yeah, yeah.
looks sort of a bit of a like rocker, but like rock and roll. Even he looked more in place than Sam Elliott does.
But it was, yeah. But I mean, his acting style is so American
Yeah,
compared to all the others. You know, it's just, and I mean, the thing about it is, no matter what you want to say about Roger Daltrey, he's done some great songs over the years. He's got an incredible voice and all that kind of thing. He just isn't a good actor.
no, I would say that the barn doors were more convincing actors than he was.
Mind
But
you, there are some other bits from the other people that aren't that great.
yeah, I've got to admit, as I was saying, there's odd bits the whole way through it. Like it just not so convincing, really. Like the whole the bit that I thought was just the worst bit actually of acting that I saw the whole way through it was when the two of the characters were using the crossbows and shooting at the
All right.
targets, and then they turn and shoot at Sam Elliott's character, and the conversation they have walking over,
Yeah.
I thought was actually the worst acting out of all of it.
To be honest, my favourite bit is there's like an escape scene where they're trying to escape the house. It borders on comedy,
Yeah,
partly because of the fact that the Sam Elliott gets more and more frustrated over his acting gets more and more over the top, and the music doesn't fit what's going on at all. It's the sort of music you have in a sort of, as I say, the romance film where people are riding off into the sunset.
yeah.
And it's
Even
like,
even when it starts getting to the point where it's obvious they're going round in circles.
yeah,
Like it's going around in circles and keep coming back to the house or the gates or whatever. And it's still like they drive off, and I'm like, no, it should be a bit more suspenseful than this.
it was just really kind of bizarre. That
Yeah,
whole bit was like strange, and oh yeah, I don't know. It's really weird. It doesn't fit with the film at all. Yeah, I was going to say about Roger Daltrey. The only thing I would say is his death scene is probably the best acting he does in the entire film,
yeah,
and that is just awful, to be honest. But it's a very strange film all round. You get the angrier that Sam Elliott gets, the more American he gets. He's
yeah.
pulling all these weird faces, and it just gets funnier. You start starting to make me laugh. But then they turn. It's really weird because they turn this kind of suspenseful, strange film into. They turn it using a very old-fashioned, well-used horror thing of she finds a painting of a woman that looks just like her, but from hundreds of years ago. The
Yeah.
patriarch of the family was in love with. You kind of go, what? When?
But it's the fact, even the fact that it's sort of played on that as well, because of the fact that there's a lot of horror films that they do that, and everyone goes, "Oh, okay." But even Sam Elliott's character turns around and goes, "This is just too much." Like
Yeah.
they've obviously brainwashed you, and I'm like, "See, look, he's even saying this, and it's not even happened that many times yet."
And of course, then Charles Gray. I've got a little bit of a spoiler here. Charles Gray gets set on fire, and the stunt guy who's burning is brilliant. But when they show Charles Gray, it's just like sort of they've just superimposed some fire over the top of him going, ah.
Yeah.
It's not great. And nobody seems to hear him scream or smell him burning, including Sam Elliott and Catherine Ross,
Yeah, who are outside the
who are
door.
outside the room.
And
Um,
even they turn around and it's just like, I don't know what's happened. Now, even without the obviously, I'm not 100% sure what the smell of flesh burning smells like, but I know what burning hair smells like. Now,
yeah.
you'd be able to hit and smell that as soon as you walked into the room.
Well, yeah, I didn't. Yeah, and then of course the body disappears, and we see it later being fed to doggies.
Yeah, doggies that look very vicious until they meet Sam Elliott and start licking him, which
Yeah.
they were trying to catch, not catch on camera, but then realised that they were just playfully being with him,
Uh,
even when they tried jumping up the gate and looking like they were biting him.
but I mean, there are a few other bits. It's like sort of they one of them gets killed with an exploding. This woman gets killed with an exploding mirror, and I thought that effect was really good.
Oh, yeah.
There are some great effects like that in it, but they then spoil it by the fact that literally about a minute after she's been killed, her blood has soaked through the floor and the ceiling of the other and is dripping on the floor downstairs.
Yeah.
It's like how to get there through there that quickly.
Yeah, so I think the funniest bit for me was, oh no, it's not even the funniest bit, but it's just sort of the overreacting bit. Is the guy when he's stands, the guy sitting on top of the roof
Yeah,
tries to shoot a shotgun with pinpoint accuracy.
yeah. I was a bit miffed by that. He's firing a shotgun and it's making a sound and hitting like a rifle.
Yeah, is shooting a shotgun with proper, extraordinarily big buckshots
Yeah,
on with the bullets and hitting them, like I'm saying, pinpoint accuracy until he shoots at Sam Elliott and misses completely. Well, it grazes his head,
well,
which I thought was
the,
very,
the other the other thing I wasn't sure about is that when they show you picture from above the roof and you see where he's sitting, I'm really not sure how he managed to fire at Sam Elliott
no,
down below from there because it was too far back from the edge of the roof to be able to fire down at him.
yeah, but it's just even that well with the blowback of the gun,
Yeah,
which was covered over by a bit of cardboard. Well, that's what it looked like. But the explosion in the guy's face and the scream he gave off, and then very gradually slid down the roof, which looked like he was. It's just that the way he slid down the roof was obviously made it look like he knew exactly where to put his feet,
yeah,
so he
yeah.
didn't fall. But it's just a lot of there were a couple of the death scenes where I looked at and I was like, oh really?
I mean, it's a very odd film. It's not a bad film,
No,
and in lots of ways, I quite like it because it's definitely a different film from the other British horror films of the 70s. And it's got something about it that makes you kind of go, this is just really odd, and I kind of like it for
yeah,
some reason, even though there are so many things that are obviously wrong with it.
yeah. It's weird. It's one of them films where you sort of sit there and go, I know I shouldn't like this,
Yeah,
but I can't help but like it. Or there's one another one's like you know you shouldn't watch, but
yeah.
it's just you have to.
It's got
My only bit that I don't understand about this, whether or not it's just my naivety or what, but the whole way through it, Sam Elliott's character is completely against what's going on, doesn't believe the fact that she's anything tied to the house or
yeah.
anything that she's saying is actually true. But yet the old man dies and suddenly he believes everything.
Well, I mean,
And he's
yeah,
accepting of it all. And
yeah.
they,
I,
even the end, when they fade away, the happy music that's playing,
yeah.
which confused the life out of me after what's just happened.
I think
Like,
the thing about it is it's trying to say it without giving away too much of what I think is going on. I think it's the power transfer thing.
oh, okay, yeah.
So I think that's what's going on there. But no, it's a very, the weird thing for me is the fact that there is so much about it that is very similar to to Italian horror movies, but it's also got some real Britishness to it that really kind of like things that would only happen in a British horror movie. And it's kind of strange. It's this strange hybrid of films where it's kind of like it's got a lot of stuff from the Italian horror movies, and some stuff from the British horror movies, and two American stars, which kind of it's just a bit.
It's a very bizarre film.
But it kind of works somehow. I'm not quite sure how, but it does.
Yeah, it's very odd. Like I sat there at the end of it, and I thought to myself like, okay, I've watched a lot of horror, especially sort of 60s, 70s horror films, where I've got to the end of it, and I'm like, oh really?
Yeah.
But this one, I sort of got to the end, and I'm like, okay, and I wasn't. Okay, I wasn't overly excited that I'd watched it, but I wasn't massively disappointed either.
No, it's an okay. It's not a bad film.
No.
It's weird. Okay, so there we have it. We had Moonfall, which was okay, but only just, and a bit overlong. We had Mr. Sleep, which we thought was excellent, and as I say, we will be talking to John Perivolaris about the film. And then we have The Legacy, which is an odd film, but I think it's definitely worth watching because it is so different from all the other films that I've seen from around that sort of time.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah.
So there you go. Thank you very much, Scott, for joining me and being part of this.
Okay, I'm glad I had the privilege to be here.
Thank you to anybody and everybody that has listened, watched, or even thought about us. As I say, next week we will be discussing Mr. Sleep and other works with John Perivolaris and things like that. So until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.
The Sciforror Film Podcast.